Alright, for Monday you need to try to finish quadratic 6 using the quadratic formula. There's an article that's posted on Google Classroom that you can check, as well as a couple different videos that explain a little bit about the quadratic formula and how to use it. In this video, I'm just going to go over parts of the quadratic 6 assignment, as well as how to type it into your calculator, because sometimes that can be the most challenging part of all. Okay, so as a reminder, we've got our quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the squared root of b squared minus 4 times ac, and the whole thing's divided by 2a. And this is what we use to figure out what x is equal to. So that's our formula that we're going to be using. You'll see here our instructions say that you can solve each equation for the zeros, meaning you can use this for all of them, but you can use any method you like. So if you can factor it, that might actually be a little bit easier. I actually prefer to factor because I don't have to worry about typing this into my calculator and worrying if I got all of the parentheses and the negatives correct. So factoring maybe is a little bit safer method to do it, but it doesn't always work because if it's prime, we can't factor it to solve, and that's when we need to use this quadratic formula. So just as a hint, if you would like to factor, you can factor for the following numbers. You can factor for number 1, number 4, number 5, and number 8. All of those ones you can factor. The other ones you will need to use the quadratic formula for. So I'm going to go through an example. I'll go through number 2 and how to type that into our calculator. So we'll zoom in here on number 2. So, well, maybe. Alright, so number 2 here. We have 2x squared plus 3x minus 8. So first I'm just going to start off by labeling my a, b, and c terms. So here a is equal to 2, b is equal to 3, and c equals negative 8. And now I'm just going to match this formula with all of these numbers. So as I type it in my calculator, I'm just going to type in exactly like that, but there's a couple things we need to remember. This fraction bar is grouping them into 2 sets of parentheses. So our top one is one parenthesis, this bottom is another parenthesis. So in my calculator when I type it in, I need to make sure that I'm doing that as well. So let's see how we do this. Alright, we're going to start off, the whole top part needs to be in a parenthesis. So I'm going to start with an open parenthesis. I'm going to type in negative b. So a negative, my b term is 3. Okay, make sure you type in a negative, not a minus sign there, or it will not work. Now the plus or minus, we're going to have to do this equation twice. The first time I'm going to do plus. So plus, now my squared root, that's second, and then the squared key gets you squared root. B squared, if it's negative, it needs to be in parentheses. Just so that I don't forget that, I'm going to put it in parentheses every time. So my b term was 3, and I'm going to square it. And now I'm subtracting 4 times, in parentheses a, which is 2, times, in parentheses c, which is negative 8, close the parentheses. And that whole thing has to be divided by 2a, but if I just divide by 2a right now, the calculator is going to use the order of operations. It's going to do our parentheses, or the squared root part first. It's going to divide by 2 and then multiply by 2, and I want it to divide by 2a. So when I push divide, I'm going to put in parentheses 2 times my a value is another 2. So I need to make sure that 2a is also in parentheses. Okay, right now if I push enter though, this is actually going to be wrong because what I forgot to do was close the parentheses from my squared root. You'll see here the 3 is closed around these parentheses, this 2 is closed, this negative 8 is closed, but there's no parentheses that's closing off my squared root. So I made a mistake. In order to fix that, I'm going to go back in my equation, and right here is where I need to have that extra parenthesis at. Okay, so I'm going to need that there. And I'm actually going to need another parenthesis because I never closed this top parenthesis either. So what I need to do is I need to insert something into this spot here. So in order to do that and not have to retype everything, I'm going to press second and then the delete button. Because right above that it says INS, or some calculators will say insert. That allows me to insert something here without deleting. So I can insert, and I'm going to insert both of those parentheses. So you'll notice here there's a triple parenthesis and it looks kind of funny, but if you look to pair them up, this first parenthesis is closing off the negative 8 with here. The second parenthesis is closing off my squared root from here that was never closed, and my third parenthesis is closing off the top of our formula for up here. Okay, so now when I go to press enter, now I get my answer. So one of my answers is x equals 1.386, and we'll just end it there. Okay. Now that was when I used the plus for the quadratic formula, but our quadratic formula has this plus or minus. So I could go back and retype the whole thing in, or if I want to save some time, I'm going to press second on my calculator, and then I'm going to press this button down here, the enter, right above it, it says entry. When I do that, that's going to put in whatever I last typed into my calculator. So I see that it's back here again. Now I'm just going to scroll up to the plus sign, and I'm simply going to change it to a minus. And when I press enter, I'll get my second answer, which is negative 2.886. So x also equals negative 2.886. And those would be my two answers for this problem when solving for x using the quadratic formula.